Payroll question time. Good to be back. I believe my colleague masterfully facilitated the last payroll question time, but it's good to be back with this wonderful panel today. We're stepping into a brand new tax year at a time of significant change. We've got new legislation, evolving compliance expectations, growing pressure on payroll teams to do more with less, and new books as well. Shameless plugs, not just from me, but from Max van der Kispersink, releasing new literature into the world of payroll, where your very own Simon Parsons is quoted more than once in the Payroll Pivot. So there's a shameless plug right at the start. But today we're going to be tackling the topics that are front of mind for payroll professionals right now, from payrolling benefits and AMAPs to job security and the future of the function and jobs itself. So as always, the session is about insight, honest perspectives and practical takeaways. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. For those of you that are new to the show, if you have any questions about payroll whatsoever, do put it in the questions box. We've actually got a new look to go to meetings today, so we're kind of navigating it ourselves, but put the questions in there. We'll ask those in real time to our panel. No such thing as a bad question. So whatever it is that's causing you a blockage in your payroll team, put it in there and we'll do our best to answer those as best we can. We are running just one poll today, but that's your chance to add your input. So please do take part. Our expert panel will be reacting to your responses as well to those. We are, of course, recording today's session, so you will get a copy of the recording post, not just into your inbox, but we'll also be releasing this on the Payroll podcast in audio format and on video on YouTube as well. So if you miss anything, you don't worry, you don't need to be scribbling notes. It's all repeatable and you'll get a copy in various formats later on. And last but by no means least, there will be a survey at the end of the show. It's really important. That's your opportunity as our audience to tell us what you want us to feature in the next edition of Payroll Question Time. And we do take those very seriously. It pretty much sets up the structure of each show that we do. So please do give us your feedback. And last but by no means least, I'm going to read out a quick disclaimer to you all, which is the presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Lots to get into today. I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful panel in just a moment. If you're not familiar with myself, my name is Nick Day. I'm the host of this show. I'm also the host of the Payroll podcast and the founder of JGA Recruitment. And I can now say I'm the author of the Payroll Pivot as well. Yeah, I'm going to do this a lot during today's show, I think. But that's enough about me. Let me move on to our wonderful panel today, starting with the very wonderful and brilliant and experienced Richard George.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Hope it's finding you well. Well, it's as nice as it is here. Beautiful day today. So Richard George, 39 years in payroll, member of the Royal 300, various aspects within the industry over the last 39 years, and currently consulting on payroll process.
Fantastic. And we're across to Samantha Mann.
Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to be here. If we're looking at years in payroll, it's 45, 46 for me. I know I don't look old enough, she says, moving swiftly on. I'm here deputising for Karen, who is taking a well-earned break, and I'm the payroll team manager here at Armstrong Watson.
Fantastic. And it's not your first rodeo, Samantha. You've joined us many, many times before as well. So great to have you back on the show. And of course, Simon Parsons.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's good to be with you again, Simon Parsons. We're all competing on ages, I think, here. I don't think it's a requirement to be old. I joined Centerfile, so that is what is SD Worx these days, in 1984. So figure out the number of years. It just doesn't seem possible when you reflect on it. But great to be with you. Great to be. Sam was on our sort of original panels in the beginning, in the early COVID days. So it's good to see Sam back again, standing in for Karen. Brings back some memories.
Yeah, well, you speak for yourself on the age front. You're making me feel very young, Simon. I've only got 24 years experience in this industry. So as the youthful representation of the PQT panel, it's an honour. Well, let's jump into today's topics. There's lots to get through. We are, of course, in a new tax year, which is super exciting, but with that comes lots of complexities. We're going to talk about the new tax year, prepping for payrolling, AMAPs, are jobs under threat? Always an interesting conversation to have, certainly from the lens that I look through the work through. And any other questions as well, which I'm hoping you as our wonderful audience will start to fill my questions box so I can start asking our panel as we go through. But most importantly, we are, of course, in the new financial tax year. So let's jump into what that means for payroll, some of the things we need to consider, payroll curiosities, statutory family payments, SSP bedding in, and more. Perhaps Samantha, seeing as you're returning to today's show, I will start with you. What are some of the curiosities and things that stood out for you as we go, or stand out for you, should I say, as we go into the new tax year?
Well, I think when we were planning today's, and yes, we did plan. We got together the payroll curiosities. I think we were talking specifically there about the differences this year that have occurred from the announcement that was made in advance about the launch date or the go live date of the new rates for statutory family payments. And what actually happened in law. I'm right there, aren't I, Simon? That was what we were discussing. And so that's this year's curiosity. I'm sure there are many more as well. The first Sunday in April is the go live date for the new rate for statutory maternity pay that came first, and then all of the subsequent family payments that followed suit. And that has been common practice for a number of years now. And as each year goes by and we get a new family payment, so too the new rates start on the first Sunday in April, which of course this year was the 5th of April. That was announced beforehand. Software developers all had that within their software, all ready to go live on the 5th of April. And then the legislation was laid, at which point somebody noticed that the 6th of April had been used, not for statutory maternity pay. Everything was fine and dandy with statutory maternity pay, but with the other family payments. And that's the curiosity that we were kind of focusing in on this year. Now, of course, thankfully, HMRC have taken a very kind of holistic, sensible approach to this, and where errors have occurred in good faith, because our software is allowing for the 5th of April being the go live date for the new rates. They won't be kind of looking to kind of make any corrections there or go after employers for getting it wrong. Now, I kind of got the calculator out to work out what the differences would be. We're looking at a mere £7.14 per employee for the incorrect use of the rate if we went a day early. Which, of course, there is a cost there to the government, because the government are funding either 92% or 109%, depending on whether or not we're looking at a small employer who is eligible for small employers relief. Now, I've done a bit of a straw poll. It's very rough and ready straw poll with the team that I'm fortunate enough to work with. We're a team of 41 in total. The two of us don't do any operational processing, but I went out to the operational team and said, has anybody had any statutory family payments that were in action sort of as at the 5th of April, 6th of April? I've got 5 for the response from the team, 5. So we're not talking about a massive amount, but obviously government might have a different view in the grand old scheme of things. Hopefully next year, and as I say, I did dig back over the legislation for previous years just to make sure that it wasn't our imagination that told us that we'd got it wrong, and indeed it has been practiced for all of the family payments, in addition to statutory maternity pay, to have the new rates from the first Sunday in April. So that's our curiosities, I think, for this time round, which takes us neatly onto the family payments. And of course, we see changes. Sorry, I've just stopped me talking at any point.
No, it's good. What I will say is that you've highlighted some 2 really key things from a recruitment lens. Is number one is curiosity is one of the most undervalued skill in the world of modern work at the moment. So I love the fact that we've even titled this Payroll Curiosities. We always need to be curious. But I think you've also highlighted a really good reason why, we've got a chapter to come later around jobs being at risk and things like that. But I think you've made a really good case as to why AI is fantastic for automating things, but why this show is so essential as well, and why this expertise is so essential. There's so much nuance in payroll, and it's not always a black and white response to how things work. We need shows like PQT to really help people navigate what is really, really complex, even when governments might feel it's really, really straightforward and simple, but of course it never quite is. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you a little bit of a break here, Samantha. I'll pass over to Simon, who maybe wants to get yourself a drink and a breather. And I'll come to you, Simon, then for taking over where Samantha left off as we move into family payments.
Yeah, sure. And I may rephrase some of Sam's comments there. She's absolutely accurate. that sort of a DWP view is HMRC got this wrong. I actually think HMRC got this right. I think it's DWP in the uprating order have copied last year's order because the Sunday just happened to be the 6th, and knew they had to change it for maternity pay and did, and forgot the rest. Plus, I think there's been a confusion in the fact that the new Northern Ireland payment comes into play from the 6th of April. However, that still doesn't change the principle. I think they're kind of implying they'll go back to Sunday again next year. So, so it's one of those situations. Maybe we see it in a number of government discussions that are live at the moment. Is that they've done nothing wrong? It's everybody else that's done it wrong. So we'll see. But it was announced by HMRC, Software Development Support Team, last November, following the review by the DWP Secretary, that they would be uplifted on the 5th. But as indicated, a colleague of mine, as it were, in the BCS group, had identified that the uprating order, which was like 2 weeks before, didn't say that. And that's the legal vehicle. So legally, the uprating happened on Monday the 6th, which is bank holiday. Will that affect many? I think, as Sam's saying, yes. What are HMRC going to do about it? As Sam's indicated, they're saying nothing. So if you applied it from the 5th in good faith, they will leave it alone. However, some employers might be angst that they're paying an extra £1.40, whatever it is, which on their 20% funding of £7, whatever, and they don't want to do that. So well, in which case, if you want to recover and you have paid the extra £7 for that week, you can make an adjustment on the next cycle, and you're all square, aren't you? However, the fee for doing that might be more than the amount you're recovering. But there we go. So we've got all the new statutory family payments that have come in, and of course, social media has gone wild, I think, Nick, with loads of questions coming into play. The thing is, it was wild before, but I guess that only piqued the people that sometimes, and it goes with payroll curiosities, that think about it in the future, but it hasn't happened. And now we've got the people who are thinking about it because it's happened to them and they didn't understand the consequence. So I guess there is a general question out there, and if people want to ask questions, how is statutory sick pay bedding in? There's lots on 0 hours contracts, the fact that now they've got to pay, whereas the view was before that 0 hours weren't entitled to it. They always were, actually. But they probably never passed the waiting days. Of course, waiting days have gone. And so it's an element of, wow. The other, and I think it is a payroll curio or curiosity, is the fact that when the employment right notification went in, it included an element that wasn't previously obvious. I think it was known that it was coming, and it was probably thought there was going to be a consultation on it, but actually it was enacted as starting. So starting from 6th of April, a new requirement that holiday details have to be recorded. And some people may think, well, we do that already. But I don't think it's about the holiday pay. It's about keeping records that show that the employer has complied with Regulation 13, 13A, 15, or 16. So is that just recording holiday pay? I'd suggest it's not. It's about showing that the holiday pay for those different regulation types is correct. And so what is Regulation 13? Everybody is entitled to 4 weeks holiday entitlement under the EU regulations, which are now incorporated into the UK. Regulation 13, everyone is entitled to additional 1.6 weeks, which can be by choice covering paid bank holidays, but doesn't have to. But if it doesn't, they're entitled to 1.6 weeks paid leave. Average earnings of 52 weeks applies at least to the first 4 weeks. And then regulation 15, I'm saying this from memory, and 16 relate to the new regulations which came in on 1st of April 2024. The options for rolled up holiday pay using an appropriate percentage of hours accrued. When I say appropriate percentage, the minimum would be 1207, but if you're comparing that to full-time equivalent staff after 12 weeks, it might need to be higher if everybody else's entitlements are higher, but the statutory minimum would be 1207. And the other option is rolled up holiday pay, which before then, although it used to be an old practice, was ruled unlawful, and so it was never lawful. It came in as being lawful on 1st of April for irregular and part-year workers. And again, minimum 1207%.
There's a point just to make a note here from the recruitment
Sure.
side of things, because I'm aware of the unlawful nature of it being before. So if you are trying to hire a payroll temp into your team, if your payroll professionals doing that, or indeed if other department managers are doing the same, there will be agencies that will offer an hourly rate now. You couldn't do it, of course, before, where you should be making very clear, expressly clear that actually the rate we're offering you is inclusive of holiday pay, and if indeed you're rolling it up. But sometimes you'll get cases where agencies will sometimes advertise a certain rate thinking it's great, not the candidate's not necessarily realizing that includes the holiday pay. So we will potentially see some changes in the way that agencies are positioning positions in terms of what they're actually paying, because it looks much more attractive when you roll those two things together, which of course lawfully we're now.
But importantly, where this then falls down for these people is that legislation is for variably paid staff. It is not general legislation. So you can't be rolled up, Nick, and neither can I, Samantha or Simon. The legislation is for people who are variably paid. So
I'm just putting it out there so people are.
No, I agree.
You don't fall into the traps. Try and take a holiday and then realise they haven't got any because they've been getting it in an hourly rate from day dot. So it's just one of those things to be mindful of. Yeah, exactly right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other challenge to that, Nick, is of course if you took them on as a temp, but they're now been there 3 months. They now fall under the regular employee requirements.
They do under AWR, indeed.
Yeah, and if the regular employees were getting 3.5 weeks or whatever, or 3.5. Generally, that 5.6 weeks equates to 28 days. If the other people are getting 35 days, why is that part-time worker not entitled to the 35?
Absolutely
because they're now not really just a temp.
Correct. After 12 weeks, they get access to the same rights as you would have as if you were a permanent employee and equivalent. So that's also something that agencies should be guiding on this, but I'm just aware not everybody does. So it's just good to be mindful if you're working with someone who's trying to get temps in, that you're working with someone that's positioning your brand and your opportunities in the right way. So Richard, let me come to you then. You had a couple of comments. I didn't mean to cut you off, buddy. But
no, it's absolutely fine. No, I think it's just going back to that. I think it's people's interpretation is a dangerous thing in that respect, because people will adapt how they want things to be to how they want things to be. You can think of numerous examples historically. Salary, there are so many, for instance, with salary sacrifice, where people are, I guess, manipulating the rules to effectively work for them. And I will use cycle to work as a prime example. But I think where I've certainly seen, because I did some consulting work about the SSP changes, is really the functionality that you've got to support you through that process as well. So statutory sick pay has changed obviously dramatically. We've spoken about it for months and months and months. You're now bringing in possibly a very different demographic to the requirement. You're also obviously needing far more, I guess, control over areas such as qualifying week patterns. So all of a sudden, if you have rotated staff, part-time staff, 0 hours staff, it's how, I guess, stringent and strong is your solution to actually support holding that qualifying earnings. Those qualifying week patterns, because it could change every week. it could change every month. But for accuracy, remembering we've now got to go back that 8 weeks, which previously was really just there to ensure that the average pay was over the LEL. That 8-week pattern now is what's actually deciding an amount of money for an individual, given it's now that 80% or SSP, whichever the lower. So I think there are probably some incredible teething stories going on, and situations in relation to how it is being accurately controlled through the business. Nick, I have no idea what it's doing.
I just meant a comment of Richard saying is, I don't know for anyone else, but your screen is jumping all over the place. It's making me slightly seasick, because I was just saying if you can switch that off, it might be useful. But maybe that was just
find a control for it. So
but
it's just me talking. Anyway, so I think that's probably still a really good story in relation to how people are finding, I guess, that whole calculation process. And when it comes to the holiday pay recording, I think, Simon, you very undersell it in relation to how big a job that is. I've had 6 jobs, 4 of them running payrolls, and because you're not paying holiday pay per se, recording can be very, very varied, because with a normal monthly paid annually employed member of staff, they just get paid as per normal. So where was the need previously in respect of recording the holiday pay? And there wasn't. So I think there are some massive challenges, and I guess the other thing as well is things changed very late in certain circumstances. So a good example being small employer relief. All of a sudden, it's not 8.5%; it's 9% now. And these are very late stories. So I think it's been a very interesting tax year end, in respect that there has been some fairly large scale change for everybody, rather than possibly effect on some.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go back to you, Simon, because I'm still on the edge of my seat to find out what clause 16 is. So I'll let you pick back up on the final element of where you were going, just to finish off that point.
Okay, so 15 and 16 relate to the irregular part-year workers and the fact of hours accrual and rolled up holiday pay. So I think I had actually concluded that bit, Nick. So it's just making sure. But there's an element of potentially you've got the Fair Work Agency coming into play now, who will come along and say, maybe because there's been an anonymous complaint, can you show me your holiday pay records? Now, the only requirement for us is to collect those from April. Don't have to have held them for 6 years behind, but from April, and hold them for 6 years, and then rolling hold them, say, okay, show us. And then it says, well, because we see it now, Nick, I see lots of adverts out there. I even see it in windows of places or at railway stations where they say a generous offering of 20 days holiday, and they almost use that sort of term. And it's sort of, well, that's 8 days short of the statutory minimum. That might be the regulation 15 holidays, but it's actually less than as actually the minimum required by law. And equally, talking about minimums as generous is ridiculous, isn't it? But there's an element of, so if someone makes a complaint, it won't be, oh, we didn't or did pay them holiday. It'd be, what was their entitlement and how have you paid it? And I guess, as Rich is indicating with the salaried, we'd just get our salary, wouldn't we? But if we've done extra hours, overtime, or received commission, there'd be a requirement to pay it on the holiday pay as well. So it sounds like you're getting double commission. Well, you are. So there's all that aspect. The thing that's really exploded, I think, over the past couple of weeks on social media is around 0 hours, because I think employers have just woken up to the fact that someone's just told them they're off. And in the old days, or before April, it would have been well, jolly good, when you get better, I'll give you some hours. Now it's, oh, I've got to pay them 80% of their 8-week average for being absent on Wednesday. Yes, you do. All right, because if you haven't set the qualifying day and you haven't given them any work, Wednesday is a qualifying day. And so there has to be at least one qualifying day, even if you haven't got any work for them. And if you make that 7, which some have decided they'll probably do, they'll get 1/7 of that for each day they're sick. But any qualifying day, if they're sick, whether they're due to work or not, now becomes payable for SSP. And I think people are just catching up to that. But there's loads and loads of queries, and then lots of people asking, well, how on earth do I calculate this average weekly earnings? It hasn't changed. The same way it's always been. I guess the challenge is that they'd never really had to consider it before, because if you were a 0 hours worker and Wednesday was the only qualifying day, that meant you didn't get paid until week 4. Whereas now you get paid on the first day. And so it may have been an element of, all right, I understand the law hasn't changed, qualifying day law hasn't changed, average weekly earnings law hasn't changed, but I didn't have to do anything with it before, and now I do. And I think that's catching people out, even to the extent some of the kind of implying that, okay, I'll make 7 days qualifying days. Wednesday's the one for 0 hours, I only have to pay them 1/7. Well, actually, if you make 7 days qualifying days, all the days absence have to be paid. So it still equates. The other thing is they can't finding it difficult to get their head round that SSP is paid as a fraction of a week and not for a day. So there's an element of the fear out there that if Wednesday's a QD, they're sick on it, but they come in and work Thursday and they only used to do 1 day a week. I've now paying them 2 weeks pay.
Yeah.
And I think there's a follow-on. I think there's a follow-on as well, Nick, to something that Simon was just saying about this whole legacy information. You know, somebody may well not have been eligible before the 6th of April, but you've now got to consider absences before that date, possibly for linking. And if you're not holding those records or accurate content of the pay, because remember, if it's a linked sickness, then we're talking about having to use the calculation for the 8-week average from the previous, which could actually lead on to 8 weeks before that. Then all of a sudden you have a possible big record issue with accurately calculating legacy. Now, this is obviously only going to last for the first couple of months for a lot of people, but if they keep being sick, if linked for the next 6 months, say, then it could create quite a lot of issues for employers for that legacy information.
Yeah, makes sense. We've had our first question in. Thank you, Elina, for sharing. The question is, are bank holidays counted within the statutory minimum annual leave entitlement where employees do not work due to the business being closed on those days?
So they're optional, but the 28 days aren't. It's whether the bank holidays equates to those extra 8 days or not. So you are not entitled to pay for bank holidays generally, unless the employer has classified in the contract that those 8 days are either paid separately or part of the holiday pay that the individual is entitled to, which must be a minimum of 28 days.
Very good. So let me come back to you, Samantha. We've heard some complexity from Simon and from Richard, what we've got to consider. We're looking at everything that's changed this tax year. What's the one area that you think payroll teams are kind of most underestimating the complexity of, and why? Or is it the same elements that Simon and Richard have kind of lent towards?
I think there's a number of different areas, but I definitely agree with what Richard was talking about there in terms of what records have been kept previously to do with statutory sick pay or absences for illness. Now, because more people are going to be eligible, it's been able to backtrack. Are there any linked periods here, 56 days or less? And if so, were they linked to a previous period? And as Richard pointed out, if there are linked periods in existence, then the relevant period, whilst it hasn't changed at all, dates back to when they were first ill, not now. So I think that would that would prove to be a challenge for employers who wish to go to that level of detail. I think also picking up on what Simon was talking about in terms of holiday pay record keeping, that requirement to keep records from 6 years for 6 years from the 6th of April. Thankfully, we don't have to backdate the records. My take on what needs to be kept is that it's the holiday that has been taken, the holiday carried for any holidays that have been carried forward from previous holiday years, the actual holiday pay paid, and whether or not that holiday pay included bonuses, commission, etc. What pay elements went up to make that holiday pay, and then of course any holiday pay that's been paid in lieu when an employee leaves, for example. So that my take on what records need to be kept as a result of the Employment Rights Act 25 changes, it is that as a minimum.
I think also, I was to say also following on, Samantha, is having sort of been in an environment of trying to teach stroke explain to people the whole area of what's included in holiday pay, it is still, I guess, not legislatively guidelined exactly what that is. So you're in a position where employers have a very, very different view of what to include in that holiday pay calculation. We know through various cases like Gary Locke and British Gas and so on and so forth that things like commission are, but in principle that can vary very dramatically to basically putting it under the rug and ignoring it's even there. And I can tell you that because I've been to clients where I'm not even allowed to talk about this subject. So it's still, I think, a very, very uncomfortable position for employers and payroll departments. And now, obviously, having to incorporate even more transparency into the requirement from this April, I guess, makes it even more of a challenge. And I think going back to what Simon said earlier about the new Fair Work Agency, what's their interpretation going to be for the history? If they're going to come at an employer, excuse the phrase, this year about holiday pay, but they want reference for years gone by, I think it's a very concerning area.
Well, let's jump into our first poll. I might get some commentary on what Stuart's just had to say from you, Simon, while we're running this, if that's okay. But the poll is this: how do you feel about the Employment Rights Act? So 4 options for you. We've got positive, negative, indifferent, or not applicable. We've got 81 people on the show at the minute. So if you can vote, that'd be fantastic. We'll get the panel here to comment on those results as they come through. But I'll come back to you, Simon, if you wanted anything to add to what Richard just mentioned, or indeed, is there anything else that we're really underestimating the complexity of as we go into this new tax year?
Well, let's do a combination. So if we look at the holiday entitlement and SSP, if I'm not scheduled someone to do work next Wednesday and they're a 0 hours contractor and I'm implementing average hours accrual or rolled up holiday pay, the value for this week, because they're not scheduled to work, is 0. However, if they phone in sick for Wednesday, I need to pay them SSP for a week, and I need to give them an accrual of hours because sickness is protected, or pay them an average of the 52 weeks rolled up holiday pay for prior periods because they're sick for being sick on Wednesday. That's just those other implications. And if we go on the Employment Rights Act as well, there's another aspect I guess we haven't covered is the fact of the 6-month requirement of employment, which comes in on 1st of January. That actually is affecting employees we have now, and certainly 1st of July. So anyone I take from the 1st of July, we can't remove them from employment without potential being unfair, as if that falls after the 1st of January. That'll apply to anyone that's been employed in the past 2 years, whereas currently there's a 2-year limit. That drops to 6 months. And equally, there's an element of we need to consider probation periods, because quite often probation is 6 months. Well, if it is 6 months, you haven't left yourself a window to stop probation, because there is 1 week's notice payment required, and they could take a case of unfair dismissal. So if you want to apply probation, they need to be shrunk down in length of time. Those are the only areas, but
as an observation, based on what you've just said, and it's given me a few alarm bells here. Maybe I should have already had them before. But is this not going to result in a lot more sickness being recorded and a lot of people taking sick? Because you know what, if I'm going to call, and I don't know if the parameters have changed where you now can demand more evidence of that sickness, but it would seem to me that I can go down the 0 hours route and earn nothing, or I can call in on the qualifying day and say I happen to be unwell today and end up with a payment that I wasn't expecting, which seems alarmingly like that might be possible.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it, Simon?
It is.
You know,
the DWP argument would be slightly different, but carry on, George. Richard, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to get people who previously would not take days off sick.
Yes.
Because they wouldn't get paid for them. And therefore they would suck it up, go to work, make everybody else sick.
Fair comment.
And then probably become worse. But then you're going to have a completely separate scenario where somebody's had a big weekend, they struggled a bit, on Monday morning and thought, you know what? Previously I wouldn't get paid for this, so I'd have to go in, but say, now I don't have to bother. So a good old duvet day type of scenario. So, but obviously DWP will go on the first one. But, it is very double-edged, I think, in relation to it.
But if we had to make a prediction, my prediction would be that we're going to see sickness go up. I mean, that's how it seems to me.
I think we're certainly going to see recorded sickness going up, because at the moment those occasional days are probably not being captured now, because they weren't fulfilling the requirement for a period of incapacity to work being 4 days. So now, of course, that 1 day could well, if it's a qualifying day. Okay, and I think that's probably one of the biggest conundrums for employers at the moment, is making sure that they've got and have agreed qualifying day patterns, particularly where they've got variable hours workers who are working different days all over the place. They need to agree a pattern, and it's only in the absence of any agreement that we would look to rely on the legislation which says it's a Wednesday. There has to be 1 day and it's going to be a Wednesday. So employers really need to be getting to grips with what policies have they got in place? Have they got any in place for these odd days? And my recommendation would be that employers, however, particularly for smaller employers who really don't have the resources to be able to kind of extend to managing sickness, but it's going to cost more for employers. An extra 1.3 million low paid workers are going to be captured and benefit from as a result of this change. And so it is for employers now to seriously consider policing their sickness absence. And so to distract or to deter employees from thinking on that Monday morning they've had a bit of a rough Sunday night or weekend, they think, I fancy a duvet day, I'm going to get a bit of SSP if I don't go in today. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a huge amount, but if you're only working variable hours, your daily rate might not be a huge amount. But if you know that when you go back to work, you've got to have a sit down and a discussion with your line manager about what was wrong with you. Have you seen a doctor? How are you feeling now? What steps did you take? If you're going to actually have to answer for that 1 day's absence, I'd like to think that would deter many employees from thinking, well, actually, it might not be worth just taking this day off. Just suck it up, get on with it. Of course, we need to be in a situation where employees who are genuinely ill have an element of pay when they're off ill to fall back on, and it isn't a huge amount. Let's be honest, we're not talking massive amounts from an individual perspective, but to deter those who might take advantage of it, then it really falls to the employer to put policies in place to make sure that they can police the sickness absence, maybe in a way that they never have done before.
But I think it's also very important that you brushed on it there, Samantha, is it's a cost to the employer.
Yes.
You know, it's not like parental where you can claim back. So it is going to create higher on cost. And I think it also, you know, should make people consider their reporting as well.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'd say it's another cost to the employer, which I think is the question. We've got the question
absolutely,
coming up
because,
about
you know,
jobs, right? It's another argument why companies are going to start looking at alternative means of whether that's automation, AI, or anything else to try and navigate what is getting very, very
well, this
expensive
is it,
to
because
employ.
you've got to be looking at trends, you've got to be looking at repeat absence, you've got to be looking at all these things.
Yeah.
You know, when Samantha Mann is off every Monday, every single month.
I have had a word with Samantha about this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a challenge, but you know, she brings a lot to the table. Is you know, this intelligent planning and this intelligent information is, as you quite rightly say, another job. So do you implement some form of AI or intelligence into your reporting structure of it, where previously you may not have bothered? I think it's fairly key.
Well, look, we've got these poll results in front of us. Pretty split poll. We've got 25% say positive about the Employment Rights Act, 26% negative, 37% indifferent. We'll move on to the next part of the show in just a moment. But maybe come back to you, Simon. Any quick thoughts on those results?
I think they're fairly reflective of where our heads are and how life is at the moment, which is just confusion, really, isn't it? So I think there are positive things in the Employment Rights Act and sensible. However, there are some elements of danger, certainly with cost of business. So there's element of people are probably having to assess whether their business is really profitable in light of this. It goes back some days, years ago, I'm thinking, Nick, there were times when staff meetings would be held with all the staff saying, hey, we've solved this and that problem, but not realizing that they were telling their employees they're actually paying them less, or their pension's not going to be any good when they come to retire, but announcing it as something to celebrate. And I guess that saved the business, but it was by denying those benefits to their employees. Whereas I guess there's an element of, is it going to be a situation where people actually assess, can we stay in business profitably to meet the new requirements? And I guess to the future, we've got to look, although it's not happening yet and the government concerned about the NEETs, etc. The intention is still announced that they want the national living wage rate to start at 18, even though that's really impacting young people employment. But then we've got youth guarantees and things like that coming in to try and counter it. It's still heading that way of cost on business. So what's that going to do to inflation and prices, or even models to say, is it going to be better? And I guess next year, even, you're thinking, again, looking at the 0 hours contract group, of course, if you've given them 5 hours of work consistently for a period of time, you have to offer them 5 hours guaranteed work pattern going forward. So there's an element of really, I guess, making sure we don't sleepwalk into an obligation, but we understand the implication of what we're doing. And if we are, and that meets the model that works and it's profitable for us, fantastic. But some of this stuff, and I'm sure the government will portray it that way, that this is positive for the UK. I think it's positive for the UK if we understand it and plan for it. But if we haven't planned for it, it might be a bit of a shock.
Fantastic. I agree. We've had another last question then for this section before we do move it on. It comes in from Tammy. It says, can you as an employer choose to pay SSP past 28 weeks?
No, not SSP, but occupational sick pay, yes. So it wouldn't be, I mean, you could call it that maybe on a payslip, but if the statutory payments people came in, it'd be kind of, well, SSP stops at 28 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was to say, there's nothing to stop an employer paying what they like, as long as it matches the SSP regulation as a minimum.
And it's always free to be more generous. They just can't be less generous than the statutory sick pay.
So the legacy change was that if you were paying more, then obviously there was no requirement to report SSP or have reporting on SSP. But I'm obviously, now that the world has changed quite dramatically, I don't think you'd get away with that one. But if it is a principle, OSP could be full pay forever.
Well, on the OSP side, we've had another question come in as well. It said, given that statutory sick pay is payable from the first day of absence, is it permissible for an employer to apply a 3-day waiting period before occupational sick pay becomes payable?
Yeah, of course, you do what you like.
Yes.
OSP. It's a bit like holiday. An employee has a statutory right for 28 days. You could pay 35, but you can have whatever rules you like for the 7 on top. And it will be the same with OSP. But as Samantha quite rightly said, it must be as good as or better than what they will receive through SSP today. And SSP means that you've got to be paid from day one. So by doing what you just said, Nick, you could just be adding an enormous amount of complication to the process, because you would have to give them SSP for the first 2 days and then start your OSP from day 3. So
makes sense. Well, look, we've still got a really important form to work through yet. Of course, it's P11D time, running up to getting those completed. So I want to make sure we give time to this part of the show. Questions, please keep them coming through. Thank you for those that have already put them in my questions box. I will try and get through as many of those as I can. Keep them coming in. So latest on 2027, of course, are in the running up to getting those P11Ds completed. What do we need to consider? Why are company cars always so complicated? Top of the class 1As, and are the benefit providers ready? So I started with you, Sam, last time. I'm going to start with you this time, Simon. Take us away.
Yeah, sure. So the later, it'd be good to be able to give you more concrete information of what's happening for 2027. 2 draft requirements or specifications were issued last year in, from memory, February, and then I think it was at November. As you've already reported, Nick, in some of your articles, it blew my top, and HMRC were met with quite short shrift of how they could issue something that was meant to be consulted on first and hadn't been. Well, the consultations have started. All I can really say at the moment is things may be different than those documents had indicated, and I think the penny is dropped at HMRC that what they're asking for, without testing the waters of what's real, won't necessarily work. So we'll have to see. So yes, you've got your P11D completion cycle coming up, but there is prep for payrolling 2027. Whatever form it is, it's going to be compulsory to some degree or another. I think I'll give a statistic which I think is accepted by HMRC. 80% of all P11Ds, 80% of returns relate to medical and cars. And you'll know the angst that I've gone to them is, why have you introduced 135 separate fields rather than benefit type value? Separate fields. By operating separate fields, software would need to implement private planes, precious metals, and timeshares, which 99% of the population don't have. And if I was to talk about payroll service provision and software, we'll never have. They'll be unique and unusual to the cases that do, but by doing it the way you've designed it, we all have to build it just in case. Well, they're looking at that, and we'll see what happens, and I'm sure we should get some announcements soon. The other angle which has been spoken with HMRC is company car reporting. The company car reporting through payrolling, it makes little sense. It's kind of odd, because if you gave a car on the 5th of April and you payroll it on the 25th of April, the start date of the allocation of that car cannot be before the 6th. And equally, if you're taking a car off someone on the 7th of April, and you've already payrolled that amount in payroll, you can't report that the car was taken on the 7th. The latest day it can be is the 5th. And so there's an element of, why have you boundaried an interactive real-time solution in this way. And I think the penny there has dropped also. So they're looking at it. But the payrolling design so far has been, why don't we take a paper document and build it into an FPS structure that employers have to use? And the response from software developers and the payroll service companies, why on earth would you do that? But equally, how on earth do you think we would get the information to complete what you've asked for? So I think they're looking at that, because payrolling at the moment is benefit value. The requirement isn't. It's from, to, participants. I would say some cheeky things that I'll say. I'll say they're almost wanting a sample of the neighbour's dog's DNA for the benefit provision. And it's an element of what for and who do you think is going to provide that? And more important, I think, is do the benefit providers know they need to give you that information? Because so far, they haven't been told anything. And if you went to them now, it's hard enough getting the data for July or June, never mind for April week 1, 2, 3, 4, May 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, June. They're not going to give it to you because no one's told them they have to. But currently, employers, that's what you're having to report to HMRC from April 27. So let's see. I think it's going to change and be simplified greatly. That's speculative on my part, probably with a bit of educated guessing, in the know a little bit, but that's all I can say. The other area, which I think is why we've got top of the class 1A, is the amount of requests being come in that they want the class 1A switched on for payrolling in 26. There is no class 1A payrolling in 26. There is no means to do it. There's no calculation specification. There's no means to report it. For 26, the reporting mechanism of payroll class 1A is the completion of the P11DB form in the adjustment box. And equally, there's an element of, well, some I even have it because I get general inquiries. Our software has been built to do it. How? Because HMRC actually haven't issued any calculation specification of what it's calculated on. So we don't know how it's calculated. They say, oh, it's the same as termination payments. Who says? Who knows that? So the legislation hasn't been written and the guidance hasn't been issued. All we have is a class 1A box on an FPS file. It doesn't tell us where it comes from and what it is. And currently the legislation is class 1A is a tally of all the benefits across the entire PAYE scheme times 15%. That's one calculation. So if you've got 10,000 people, calculate all the benefit totals up, apply 15% once. That is the benefit charge for the employee. Current specification is you're going to be doing 15% 10,000 times and tallying up the total of those. But it's worse than that. Potentially you're doing that every month or every week. Is that what the legislation says? Because at the moment, Class 1A legislation doesn't say that at all. In fact, it's a judgment point on the 5th of April under current legislation, whether there's a liability. So if the employee went overseas and they're not liable to UK Class 1 national insurance, there is no liability to Class 1A on that benefit. But what if that was mid-year? So there's all those sorts of things. So Class 1A is not this year's, and it's a question or answer at all. Just carry on with the P11DB form. It's quite easy. You can do it on your portal. The question on Class 1A is HMRC now need to define the legislation and issue the specification. Is it going to be like apprenticeship levy, or is it going to be like termination payments? It's more likely it will be like termination payments, but we don't know. But that's going to lead to significant rounding differences than the current liability.
Yeah, and
I
I think
Simon doesn't have a view on this, can't you?
I was about to say something similar. Like, you can see that you're very passionate. It sounds like there needs to be
Sure.
some level of reform or change before we get to 2027. But
And I
let's
think there will
assume
be.
if there isn't, maybe I'll come to you, Samantha, with mandatory payroll of benefits on the horizon for 2027, and with Simon highlighting there that the benefit providers aren't necessarily even aware they have to make any changes at this moment in time. Do you think we're heading for another last-minute scramble like we've seen with past reforms? Do you think change will happen before that happens? Obviously, PQT is here to prepare people the best way that we can, but what's your view?
Well, I'm happy to be guided by Simon on this one, because Simon does have that inside view, and whilst he can't tell us, because if he did he'd have to kill us or something like that, I totally get that, and I can understand why Simon's actually representing software developers feel so passionate about this, because at the end of the day it's going to be software developers who have to resolve this in advance on behalf of the employer. So the employer, hopefully, if Simon and his colleagues across the software developer industry do their jobs in consultation with HMRC and any other relevant departments, then that will make our lives a lot easier. What we need to be doing at this moment in time, if we've already resisted going voluntarily with payrolling, and to be quite honest, voluntary payrolling is different to what mandatory payrolling is going to look like in a whole heap of different ways, then we need to be preparing for this now. Now, if we've already resisted going for payrolling anyway on a voluntary basis, then at the moment we're going to be right in the thick of getting our P11D, all of our information together on our P11Ds, in order to submit our P11D and our P11DBs by the 6th of July and issue the information to our employees by the 6th of July if we're P11Ding the benefits in kind. If we actually are also touching on voluntary payrolling, then by the 1st of June. So there's various different deadlines that we need to be very familiar with. But if we haven't, we now need to be thinking about what we are going to have to do from April. Now, you asked the question, do I think it could be kind of put back? I have my fingers crossed, but when I say yes, I do really hope so. But if Simon and his colleagues do their job, which I have no doubt that they will, and they'll do it well, then there's no reason why we shouldn't be. But it sounds to me like there's still some very big questions to be resolved, and if they can't be resolved, then maybe we do look at it. I mean, it's certainly not unprecedented for there to be 2 delays on big changes, and this is a big change. It's not a minor payroll tweak, it is a transformational project within an employer situation. If they've always submitted P11Ds, they might have a totally different team who deal with the benefits and expenses in kind, expenses and benefits in kind values and reporting. It might be absolutely nothing to do with the people in payroll, and so actually getting together a relevant team who are all going to be affected by this, and therefore or who all need to feed into this planning process. If they haven't already done so, they need to be doing it now. Not forgetting employees, of course, because it's the employees who are going to be affected at the very end of this, because they're going to be taxed in real time on benefits in kind. They may already be being taxed on previous benefits in kind through the tax code as well. So they are potentially, not in all situations, but potentially facing being taxed twice in the same pay period. Talking about cash flow for an employee, you also have potentially the same problem for an employer. So at the moment, Class 1A is an annual end of year charge, one-off lump sum charge. But once they move to mandatory payrolling, they're going to be dealing with Class 1A in real time, it all being well, in real time, as well as for 1 year at least having an annual payment of Class 1A. So that's going to affect employers from a cash flow perspective. So do I hope that it could be put back? Of course I do. Certainly there is precedence to say that it could be. But as I say, if Simon and his colleagues and cohorts are all doing their job, and I know Karen, when she's back off her holiday, she'll be doing exactly the same, then there's no logical reason why it should be put back. But it does require everybody to kind of start to ready themselves now. So,
Yes.
Sometimes, Nick, it's positioned that this is a software issue. And the reality is I can give you the software that captures the dog's DNA sample result. But if they want that, you, the employer, have to get the dog sample. I can record it. I'm not getting the dog sample. Does that make sense? But so hopefully we will see a simplification down. So I think payrolling will go ahead, but hopefully we have a simplification down that all they're getting is a benefit type and a value. But potentially we can prepare because our benefit providers are going to supply that. And if they're not, who is?
Well,
Because
and there'll be another charge in there for employers somewhere if they don't, because this is going to be a lot of information to collate. I'm going to come back to you, Richard, quickly. Two things. Apologies for dogs barking in the background.
go get his DNA sample.
Yeah. Anything else we need to consider in the run up to getting P11Ds completed? I want to come to you. Before I do, I've had another question back in on the SSP section. I just want to make sure we cover this off. So, question comes in from Becky. It says, if you pay 12.07% holiday pay, how do you pay this for a 0-hour person on SSP, sick pay, and holiday pay?
Yes. You're required, if they're on sick leave, you're required to pay an average of the prior 52 weeks, 12.07% that you've paid already.
Yeah.
If it's only SSP, you know, it will affect the calculation, sadly.
Yes. So you're not paying it on the SSP, you're paying it on the averages of prior history.
Perfect. And back to you, Richard, on the previous question, which is anything else we need to consider as we run up to getting the P11Ds completed for this year? Because I thought that conversation was based on 2027, but we've got the P11D deadline looming this tax year as well. So anything else we need to add before we move on to the next section?
No, I guess it's just same old when it comes to P11D. There's no change in process. I think you know, all of the conversation at the moment is about what is going to happen, but also it's not being complacent about this process. I can't remember the last one, the one before, but I went to a very large international finance company who, as soon as I started discussing the mandatory side, said, we don't care because we already payroll everything. Well, we're talking about a Forbes listed business. So there is a level of complacency out there. There is a situation where this is going to move really quickly, e.g. April, even though it's a year away, will come around fast. Are you talking to your providers? Have you had conversations already from them? Because as Simon quite rightly said, this could be weekly as a process. And that's a significant change possibly to what's going on at the moment.
Yeah.
I think the other side, which is something that, you know, P11D has lots of adjustments, but the joy at the moment, if that is the right word, is between April and the end of June, you've got time to review, run draft examples, have a go at it a few times, talk to the employees. That's gone. So in principle, you're going to possibly still have a window of alteration after April each year, because remember, you still will have till July the 6th to finalize your return. But those adjustments won't have a liability on them because you've got no way of taking tax. So I think it's really understanding, from what Samantha and Simon have already said, net impact, but also contemplate the further impact of your process, which is going to be absolutely critical.
Good. Last question coming in from Louise, just as we move on to the next section, which is an acronym I didn't know before today's show, but I have looked it up, so we'll get there in just a moment. Is there a consideration that when benefits are payrolled from April 27, and there will also be a 26-27 P11D reporting that employees will be taxed in 1 year on 2 years of benefits?
It happens now, Nick. P11D causes that. So payrolling won't. But at the moment, when I join an employer and I've got a benefit such as medical, saying that's £2,000 a year, HMRC don't know about it. And then I'll tell them in July or whatever, and then by September, they'll think, this bloke should have paid £800 on this. I'll collect it now. And then they'll say, but we assume they'll have that benefit this year. We'll collect it now. So they're collecting £1,600 in 1 year. Nothing to do with payrolling. In payrolling, they will be collecting the 800 across 12 months. So it's flat, but they're not aware of the medical benefit because the P11D hasn't been processed. Will there be a prior tax year collection? There will, but that would have occurred anyway. That happens now with P11D. Because it's flattened for the collection of current year, it won't be coded in, but the prior year will. So prior debts will be caught up with. But for most people on P11D, HMRC have predicted in the tax code what will be payrolled. The tax code will have that removed so that it isn't double taxed for the in year. But prior debts will still need to be collected, but they're caused by P11D, not payrolling.
Okay, perfect, fantastic. Well, listen, let's move on to the next part of the show. I've seen a lot of conversation now that I know what this is on socials actually around this element. So I saw the headline AMAPs. I didn't know what it was, but Payroll loves an acronym. I realised it discovers for advisory mileage allowance payments. So it's currently under government consultation. I've seen lots of chat. I know you have as well, Simon. We've actually been on the same chat sometimes talking about people and whether they're getting enough to cover their costs for fuel and whether employees want to travel certain places as a result. So we've got different rates. There's a fuel crisis, tax versus national insurance, and we want to try and understand what is fair. So I don't know who wants to kick this off. Maybe you, Simon, here, because I know you've been in the social channels, although I have Richard's hand up.
Richard,
this is one of mine.
You are a car lover as well, aren't you? You've got a brand new lovely Audi. You know, you want to get your mileage paid.
I spent a lot of time on this one with a lot of people. So AMAPs is a very legacy situation. I know Simon in your pay advice, big shout out to pay advice, was speaking about it the other day on the grounds that it has been in place at the rates it's on since 2011. So you're talking about a 15-year-old decision on the cost and liability of using your car. What is also very important, and it does seem more and more the case with employers, is that money isn't just for the petrol. So the original understanding of AMAPs was that it was to cover the cost of the journey, but also a percentage towards basically the upkeep of the vehicle. Now, in 2011, petrol was a tad cheaper than it is today, just a tad. And on those grounds, realistically, at least half of the money that you were receiving at 45p per mile was actual contingent money that you would be using for the upkeep of the car. The position, however, obviously is fuel is probably 4 to 5 times more now than it was in 2011. And it gets to a point, and it probably is at the moment, that if you are driving for instance, a comparatively high big engine diesel, the 45p now isn't even covering the petrol or the fuel cost. So you are in a situation, and we were in a very similar situation a couple of years ago, where it was costing people their own money just to cover the fuel to use their car for business. So it's kind of completely out of spec now to its original, I guess, ratio entitlement to a member of staff. And as such, it isn't now a fair representation of what it was meant to be originally. I think that's probably a fair statement of it.
I think
So I did a little bit of research myself. I'll come up to just a moment, Samantha. And I don't know if this is accurate and challenge me, but the research I did, because I didn't know what the acronym was, and it left me down a little bit of a tunnel of research. The rate, apparently based on inflation, where we are at the moment, would need to be around 67 pence per mile, is what I read. Industry bodies argue employees are now effectively out of pocket using current rates. That's the argument going back. But I would argue, suggest, when I say rather than argue, that if we're now looking at doing, the Treasury's now looking to do a formal review, would that not suggest that they are aware that some of the workers are picking up the tab, that they actually rates haven't kept up with costs? Is that what we're assuming here? So we're expecting that to go up? Sorry, Samantha, I know you're going to say something.
I mean, well, I think there's a couple of things that need to just be highlighted. And if we were to sort of take a look at it from HMRC's view, HMRC would say employers can be as generous as they wish with their mileage rates. The difference is, and this is the reason why most employers will choose to use the AMAP rates, is because there are minimal, we've just moved on from P11Ds and payrolling, but there are no reporting requirements. Let's not get into the conversation about national insurance and earnings periods, but there are no reporting requirements if the employer pays AMAP rates. So from an administrative burden perspective, this is the most cost effective, if you will. So hence employers use it because they can pay it and with no worries about tax or national insurance implications. They can pay more, but if they pay more, they need to report those additional payments. So of course, this is where you get into the administrative burden and the cost of that admin burden, which of course all adds to it. But they can be more generous. They can also reimburse actual costs to the employee. But again, you get into the concept of admin burden for both the employee and the employer. So the pressure, therefore, is on government to consider the rates and whether or not the rate should be increased, because as Richard pointed out, in 2011, that's a long time ago. And we've talked about what happens when thresholds and rates don't increase. You get that fiscal drag. We talked about this a lot in the last session. And of course, that this is essentially happening now. Costs have gone up, but the rates themselves have not. But still, from an administrative perspective, employers don't have to report those rates. Now, my understanding, because again, I've done my homework to see where we're at, because Simon mentioned about the consultation. My take on this is that the Chancellor has committed to carrying out a review in advance of the next budget. But my take on that is that they are going to focus on people who rely on their jobs, rely on their cars to do their jobs. So, for example, home carers, who have to travel from one home to another to provide care. So they rely very heavily on their jobs to do their cars to do their job. So my take, just on what I read from the government library, was that would be the focus for in the initial short term. Now, what worried me about that statement was potentially you could end up in a situation where you'd have to be defining who relies heavily on their car for work and who doesn't, who's just using it for occasional business visit. And of course, this is people using their own car, not a company car. So that would be my take on this. And this is why people use AMAP rates, because from a reporting perspective, they don't have to worry that they're getting themselves into hot water and HMRC are going to present them with a big bill 6 years down the line. So, but HMRC would say, and have said, I think on more than one occasion, employers can pay more if they want to. But then
I was going to say quite interesting. While we've been talking, I've just been having a look. And why did it go up in 2011? And actually, in 2011, there was a significant change in the average price of petrol. So if you actually look in 2009, it was 89p a litre, believe it or not. And in 2011, it was averaging just under 130. So obviously something significant happened
I stayed up late yesterday watching the documentary on the birth and the demise of Concorde. Fascinating documentary. So I'm very sad. It finished about midnight yesterday. But the main reason Concorde ended up being grounded was due to the escalating cost of fuel and less passengers travelling as a result of that cost of fuel. So, and funnily enough, they grounded Concorde just after 9/11, back to 2011. So I suspect fuel prices at the moment were at an all-time high. It grounded Concorde. It obviously caused problems. So this has just happened to be because I watched that documentary yesterday. I'm aware fuel prices would have been very, very high at that time. And of course, in a moment now with the crisis going on and oil prices changing, the people are going to be out of pocket. So I guess the question I'd maybe come to you, Richard or Simon, I don't mind who takes it on, but should we move away then from flat rates entirely and towards a real cost reimbursement model? Or does that just add far too much administrative burden on payroll teams in government?
Potentially, I think it does add quite a complication, but if there were capabilities and systems to handle it, that would be maybe something that could be justified. The intention of the AMAP rates was to give out an easy and simple method. I guess there was a call for review some years ago, but it was denied by HMRC at the time on the basis that, of course, in 2011, you're probably only getting, I'm going to make up a figure, 35 miles to the gallon, whereas in 2020, you'd be getting 60 miles to the gallon. So our cars were much more efficient, and so the costs were lower. Of course, we've got to that point now where actually the efficiency of cars is not really changing, but rates of diesel have gone up 50 pence over these past couple of months. So there's an element of it's similar to 2011. And is that aligned? I think it's been at that ouch point for a couple of years. So the reason for the consultation isn't the invasion of Iran. It was in line for going ahead then. But I think it's justified more by the fact of the current position. However, I guess the government are probably hoping that this will end, but it's not a war of their making, and rates will come down. But we'll see. But I guess there's an element of all the same. It was 15 years ago. It's about time. Plus, I guess the government have had troubles in relation to the national insurance reclaim, because taxation law and national insurance law are different. With taxation, it's 45p, but only for 10,000 miles, and then it's 25p thereafter. So if you do 15,000 miles, 10 is at 45, 5 is at 25. But for national insurance, in effect, the rate is 45 for the 15,000. And we've had the case which has brought this complicated, you've got to file FPS file adjustments, this, that, and the other. However, other Excel spreadsheet submissions have been subsequently accepted, where people have gone in and said, right, we want all the employers' national insurance back because we've overpaid. We find ourselves in this mess. We'll have to see what the result is, but it's open now. So if this is affecting you as employers and you have people who use their own car for business purposes, and I'm going to say, I do, Nick, my hybrid is my car, it's not the company's. I use it. You know, does it break even for me? It gives me a car at the end of the day, whereas if I had a company car at the end of 4 years, I have an asset of 0, but I've paid all the tax on it. At least I have an asset. You know, go for it. Look at the consultation and respond and give a view of how it's affecting your workers, because it's open now. And
have
it's
we got
open
a link,
to review.
Simon, that we could maybe add into the chat? So
yeah, I think we probably could.
You have a look for that, Simon. It sounds like they've got a tough thing to balance fairness and simplicity. That's
yeah, and I think just to bottom this, you know, you've got two different scenarios and I guess a big caveat. Number one is the likes of me when I'm on the road and Simon on the road and so on and so forth. That amount is very, very different structurally, financially, etc., because we do a lot of miles. Okay, it's more the consideration of the more, I guess, pro rata person who doesn't necessarily do as much mileage and has the net effect on them is going to be far higher. But I think the last thing is, we now have all these different vehicles with different ways of propelling, but the rate is the same. So, Simon has a hybrid. I have a DPF diesel. Samantha could have an electric car. And all of those cars have significantly different costs in relation to them getting from A to B, where at the moment it really doesn't matter. So I think there's probably more to this than just, well, let's work out the ratio of cost of fuel versus cost of running and give a new number out. I think there's a lot more to it to make it efficient, would we say.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've had another question, which is actually a little bit off topic. I love these questions because we're going, this is good. This is where the panel can really help the challenges which people are faced with on a day-to-day basis in payroll.
So it's still about payroll.
It's still about payroll. Yeah, it's not a question about whether you should have got your new car in red or blue. So a little bit off topic. Can I ask a quick question about basic minimum wage calculations? For national minimum wage, is it acceptable to use weekly hours times 52 weeks, or should it be 52.18 weeks to account for years from 261 or 262 working days? Thank you.
There aren't 52 weeks in the year.
Yeah, it depends what you're doing. Yes, I think 52 weeks down is fine. 52 weeks up is problematical if you're unmeasured worker. So if anybody's considered unmeasured, and some are salaried people like myself could be viewed as unmeasured because I do lots of time working which isn't recorded or paid. All right, you could say I've got a sufficient salary that rewards me to cover that. However, because the company don't know all the extra stuff I do, an inspector would probably come in and say it's unmeasured, in which case what we do find is some unmeasured workers' salary is calculated by taking their average hours times the rate times 52 divided by 12. For the unmeasured workers, that doesn't work because there are 52.18 average weeks a year. If you count in a leap year, it's actually less. It's 52.14 weeks in an ordinary year and 52.23, I'm saying that from memory, in a leap year. If you add the 5-year cycle together, it comes to 52.18. And as a general principle, that basis seems to be accepted. I'm not saying it will be accepted, but it exceeds an ordinary year. It might be short on a leap year. But if you take an annual salary and divide it by 52 the other way, so if you do, then fine. But if you're multiplying up to find the base to go, it may not work, is the problem. Now, annual salaried people, their annualized hours that don't do extra is slightly different calculation. But I think most annualized hours aren't, because we do extra.
And I think that whole area has caught out many, many businesses historically. There was a very, very, very large food retailer who liked things to count, who had this issue directly, where they were using 52 rather than 52.14, and it cost them 6 figures in relation to adjustment to their staff, because every penny counts.
9.7 million, if it's the one I'm thinking of, Richard. Yeah, it was a big one. It might be a slightly different example. Another question that's come in here as well, just while we're finishing off this topic. I'm conscious of time. National insurance relief on car allowance if employees are reimbursed below the AMAP rate, which now has to be processed.
Well, it doesn't have to be processed, but if you want the NI relief, it does. Yes. So you can do that in payroll and offset it so that they pay less national insurance. That is correct. At 45p rate across the board, but not for tax relief. Tax relief will be based on the 45p, 10,000, 25p thereafter. But quite a lot of people will claim the tax relief through their self-assessment or tax return rather than payroll. National insurance aspects can't be claimed by self-assessment. That would be a payroll activity.
But there is a second process for an employee if the employer isn't claiming it for them.
We've had a thank you, very helpful as always. Well, let's jump into the next part of the section. We haven't got an awful lot of time. We may have to come back to this another time to go into more detail, but our jobs under threat, unemployment figures just released show an increase of 0.8% from the previous year. Layoff rates, short-term working, alternatives to consider, and of course, up effects on national minimum wage and national living wage as well. Obviously, it's a market that we're seeing changes from a recruiter's lens as well. Although we specialize in a particular market, it's usually a micro version of the macro. And I don't know who brought this into the discussion, so I'll start with you, Simon.
It's probably not my topic, so well picked on there, Nick, so that's fine. But our job's under threat. I think that's true. Well, there's the other aspects of going back to the Employment Rights Bill. Of course, some employers will be waking up to the fact that people that they don't necessarily want to keep, they've only got to the 1st of January to remove them if they've been employed under 6 months. So there is an element of, will that start to affect and make it? Plus times are difficult. So we've got fuel going up, costs going up, council tax going up, business rates going up, everything's going up. Is there an element of we've got to find efficiencies within a business? And quite often efficiencies can mean staff. So is there an element of we'll see unemployment start to go on the over the peak or whatever and start to come down? And I don't know. I mean, it's your industry, Nick, in the payroll world.
I'm very happy to make a bit of commentary, and I can talk about the world of payroll if those are interested in seeing it. I mean, what I'll say is at the moment, organizations are cutting staff, but they're doing it really to try and cut costs rather than capability. So in terms of what we've seen, yeah, from a payroll specific angle, the smaller organizations are decentralizing payroll teams, they're outsourcing or they're consolidating. But actually, we've seen a big increase in governance heavy roles. I mean, I know some of you here work for large vendors or work with vendors, and you'll see a lot of those vendors, advertising for legislation experts, product experts, different kind of positions. I think we're seeing a transformation rather than a cutting. We're seeing a lot of positions change in light of technology, change in light of the more complex legislation that we've been discussing on today's panel. So I think there's definitely been a shift. Based on job data that we obviously analyse, we've definitely seen an increase in redundancies this year compared to where the 2025 started. We record some data. We've seen a 9% increase in jobs at risk of redundancy compared to some similar data that we had in 2025. So that's interesting, I think, to look at. And redundancy always thinks an interesting word anyway. It's roles that aren't necessarily going to be replaced, right? So again, we're in an era of transformation and roles changing rather than necessarily disappearing. But I do think all of these costs that have been put on the employer are forcing employers to consolidate or outsource or change the way that they look about engaging their labor. So I think there's been a lot of shift from our side, but I'm, as a recruiter in this space, certainly from a payroll angle, I've never been more optimistic. I mean, obviously, as a recruiter, I like working with the heavy roles. I like seeing payroll getting the attention it deserves and seeing employers invest in those more significant roles that really do move the needle. Automation and AI is going to take on some of that manual laboring type work that payroll people maybe have done in the past, but they are being replaced with people that are really adding some strategic value to the function. So I'm excited. I think I did do some research on LinkedIn compared to numbers of payroll people in the market, and we are seeing the number slightly down year on year in terms of those that would, I guess, call themselves traditional payroll roles. And I say that because historically, we've always measured people in the payroll industry on LinkedIn by titles such as payroll manager, payroll supervisor. So those numbers are down quite significantly. But I would question whether that means there are less payroll people. It's the titles have changed. And I've got to now completely change the way that we've measured that data to now try and capture all of the new titles that have come into the industry to see if the actual number is less or more. And the truth is, I don't know the answer to that, but I would suspect actually the overall number is probably higher. So that's some of the things that we see on our side, for sure, if that's helpful.
Sure. Well, I was just thinking, Nick, with the fact that certainly not in-house necessarily, but external, we all now have to be regulated tax advisors. That should bump up our salaries by about 40 to 50%, should it not?
Yeah.
I think
Go on.
To catch up with the other tax advisors.
Yes. Richard.
Well, I was going to say, I think, from my experience over the last 24 months, especially, the employment position might not be where the cuts are being made. So obviously my previous role was all about education training. We saw numerous people's training budgets disappearing. Instead of getting rid of the staff, getting rid of the, I guess, overhead cost of having those staff, which is very short-sighted, and causes disappointment and dissatisfaction for the staff, and removes that, I guess, encouragement to improve. So I think the employers are looking at numerous ways, if not necessarily getting rid of staff. Because we can't all hide behind that, or we can get away with less staff because we'll use more AI.
I mean, as a recruiter, I think you see the headline numbers and the unemployment rate looks quite stable, but I think it's masking a weaker labour market condition sort of underneath that. And you're seeing less job postings for sure. Now, maybe they're advertising in different ways, but as a recruiter, we're seeing about 25% less adverts posted at the start of this year. So from January to April than we saw in 2024. That's a significant drop in vacancies being posted. 25% is what we've seen a difference in. So vacancies, you have to presume, therefore, are down, less adverts, and people in the job market will be experiencing this. They'll be realised there used to be loads of jobs everywhere. It's like buses, they all come at once when you don't need something. When you do, they've all gone. And we're seeing that as a recruitment firm, less jobs being advertised, which means there are less opportunities being created. And I think that's a real shift that's underneath it. We've talked about on the show recently, Simon, about youth unemployment being at a warning levels at the moment, at dangerous levels at the moment, and wage growth lowest in 5 years. So I think we had some really exciting times as a recruitment firm in the Great Resignation time, where everyone was moving, jobs were everywhere, people were coming out of the pandemic and hiring, maybe over hiring in certain places, and wage costs going through the roof. I think there's been a level of stabilization and contraction since then. But overall, we still remain optimistic as a recruitment firm going into this year. There've been sort of other signals in the past that have been more, I guess, worrying than they are right now. But I do think we're masking slightly a bit of a probably broader problem that might start to weaken the labour market a little bit later on in the year, but we'll see how it progresses. I don't know, Samantha, you have any views on what you're seeing in the market on this subject?
No. I mean, consistent with what you've been talking about, Nick. I think it was me who actually mentioned this subject, just simply because we were starting to get questions coming through from clients on redundancy is a standard question, if I'm honest, and it just give us an opportunity to just talk about the rates. The Great Britain rate, maximum weekly rate now for redundancy pay is £751, and in Northern Ireland £783. Personally, I thought they were shockingly late being announced, but they have now been announced. But we were asked by a client about layoff rates, and I confess I've never had to deal with layoff rates, so I had to do some research to find out about that. So, it did get me thinking, is this something, because obviously working in payroll, if employers go down this route, need to go down this route for whatever reason, and Simon summarised quite nicely all of the various reasons why you might need to have to consider this, the different options that exist for employers to open a discussion with their employees, not necessarily automatically go into redundancy, not necessarily automatically go into layoffs, but having an active discussion with their employees about what could resolve the issues. So anyway, I know we
are slightly over time, but yeah, maybe we'll return to this subject later on. I'll give a big thank you to our audience today, to our panel, Richard George, Samantha Mann, Simon Parsons. There is, of course, a free payroll legislation guide that you can download on the SDA Worx website, so do take a look at that. And Simon's also put the link to the mileage rates review in the chat as well. You'll get a copy of this session in your inbox after today's session as well, so do watch it back if you've missed anything. But do go and grab yourself that free payroll legislation guide. It'll keep you up to date with everything you need to know, and it's been updated with insights from our very own Simon Parsons. So do check that out. We'll put the link to the next episode and maybe come back to that in the next PQT as well. But I've been your host. My name is Nick Day. Thank you all for joining us today, and the next session will be on the 21st of May. So do sign up at sdworks.co.uk/PQT. Thank you everyone for taking part, and thank you for joining us today. Enjoy your weekends when we get there.
Bye-bye. Thank you.